percentage. But the staggering piece to that, Carrie, is that 88% of child abuse goes unreported.
Right.
I mean, that is 88%. So if we, to try and understand those numbers, if we took 26,000 and that was only 22%, we're talking well over 100,000 children in the state of Kentucky were abused or experienced abuse or neglect in the year of 2016. And that is just ungodly. And if that wasn't enough to say, yeah, that's worth it, here are a few more statistics. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before they turn 18. And what's hard about that is 90% of the abusers are known by the child.
Yes.
And, you know, I thought about that, Carrie, and I thought, you know, I talk to my kids all the time, and the message I have is just be careful of strangers. You know, look out for strangers. Don't talk to strangers. If a stranger approaches you, run. Those sorts of things. But when you put that into perspective of what we're talking about here, that 90% of the time the abuser knows the one that's abusing them. Not that we need to throw the message of don't talk to strangers, not that we need to downplay that, but I think we also need to add the fact that, hey, it's not always strangers who are doing the harm here. As a matter of fact, another statistic, 34% of people who sexually abuse children are family members. And that is a difficult one to swallow, for sure. You know, one of the things that I talk to my children about is the importance of not undressing themselves or having an adult, whether it's a family relative or a grandparent, to not undress them, that they can put on their underwear themselves. If they need to take a bath, then they can take a bath. Not allowing adults to wash their private areas. And we'll get into a little bit more of that. But again, just the staggering stats that oftentimes the ones that are doing sexual abuse are either they're known and oftentimes not only known but within the family. So those are, I think, enough reason for us to be having this conversation so that we can kind of raise that awareness throughout the state. And maybe before we go much further, Carrie, maybe you can tell us a little bit and our viewers a little bit about what we're talking about when we say abuse, child abuse. What is that?
Absolutely. Child abuse, it has a lot of different definitions. And I think one of the things that's really important to point out in any definition is that it can be an action or it can be a failure to act, either one. That's an important part of thinking about abuse. And so it can be a parent or a caregiver to a child causing injury, death, emotional harm, risk of harm, but it can be, you know, that action that occurs, but also the lack of action as well.
So that neglect piece is also a part of it. So not only is it sexual, physical, but also that lack of attending to a child's needs.
Yes, indeed. Yes, and there are 4 different types of abuse that we typically talk about a lot of the time, one being the most commonly heard of, which is, of course, physical abuse, the thought of hitting, slapping, burning, shoving, things like that. There are the ones that we frequently hear about or think about the most often. Sexual abuse being the second type, which can include things such as touching, fondling, but it can also include more passive acts, taking a picture of a child naked or asking a child to watch or participate in an act against their will or through coercion. Emotional abuse is always the more difficult one, I think, for people to wrap their heads around sometimes because it's a little more gray. Emotional abuse can involve things that have to do with humiliating or shaming, more aggressive sorts of things, but it can also involve withholding things from a child, isolating a child from things that they need, some of the more passive things. And that one also gets a little bit more of the attention from courts and from our systems that are in place in this country when it comes to what exactly constitutes emotional abuse and what does not.
Well, and I can understand that to some degree because it's difficult, right? It's difficult to identify emotional abuse because you're not seeing marks on the skin. You know, maybe you're not seeing a child acting out, but like you said, just being threatened or having things withheld.
Absolutely.
Or oftentimes maybe even threatening a loved one if they don't behave. You know, is that emotional coercion there? So,
yes. And then the fourth type is neglect, which we often think of as things like neglecting a child, leaving them at home alone, or not providing proper supervision. But it can also include things such as withholding medical treatment, or exploiting a child can fall into that category. We often think of exploitation as being sexual abuse, but exploiting a child in ways too, forcing them to work, or different things like that can also constitute neglect as well. So those are the 4 different types: physical, sexual, neglect, and emotional abuse.
So I guess in some of that, and thinking about all of this, I think it's important to identify what is it? In my mind, I think, gosh, that sounds absolutely horrific. How could any adult do something like that to a child? And so that kind of leads me into this next part of like, so why does it happen? How does this sort of thing happen? And as a parent, as a relatively new parent with young children, I begin to grow more compassionate to a child who is, or to a parent who is abusing a child. And I want to make sure I'm very clear on that. I in no way condone that behavior, but understand sometimes is what draws, what environment creates the abuse. And you think about single parenting, a large part of what we're doing is fighting that. And the reason it happens oftentimes is because there's a lack of knowledge, right? There's a lack of parenting skill and knowledge. And when I mean that, what's so closely related to that is the lack of understanding of developmental stages, where a child is developmentally. And because parents don't understand developmentally where a child is, it's very easy for them to have unrealistic expectations, right? I'll give you an example. And I was in public with my children, and we were, I don't know where I was waiting at a store, and I can't remember exactly where it was, but as I was waiting, there was another father there with a little child, and the child was probably 2 years old, maybe younger, maybe a little older, give or take a month. And they were sitting on the floor, and the father was trying to get the child to pick up an item that they had left on the floor, and the parent was giving instructions, and he continued to say, "It's on your right. It's on your right. No, not on your left, but on your right." And so here a parent is trying to give instruction by use of direction, but a child, 2-year-old, doesn't have any idea what direction is, right? They don't understand left and right, right? And this idea of it's the red ball, it's red. Again, not being able at that age to maybe identify their colors makes that very difficult. So understanding that here a parent is who doesn't understand this developmental stages, and so the expectation that they would understand leads to frustration on the parent's part, right? This idea that, gosh darn it, I'm asking you to pick this thing up. It's right there, can't you see it? And that child doesn't understand the communication. So you can sense how a parent then can become aggravated to the point of losing their mind or becoming frustrated. So you've got that. You've got this idea of knowledge, a lack of parenting knowledge, skills, this idea that all I have is the ability to spank a child instead of using timeouts or other ways to discipline a child. And then social isolation also can lead to this type of behavior.
Yes, it can.
Because when you don't have people in your community for that respite piece, right, just to take a break, and I think in some ways that's what that parent needed, was they needed a break, right? They needed a break from trying to work with this child repeatedly, and maybe having their partner there, they would be able to have that break. And so I think when people move outside of their social network, it becomes easy. Because one, I don't have the respite, I don't have people to come and help me with my child and take care of my child, but also I don't know anybody. So if I do then decide to ask somebody to sit my child, I don't really know who that person is. Right. And sometimes those people, unfortunately, can be perpetrators and can be the abusers themselves.
Yes.
A fourth piece to that, it would be any type of drug or alcohol abuse or addiction within the home. Oftentimes can lead to child abuse, can lead to these sorts of behaviors. And again, easy to logically understand that progression of someone who is in need of a substance and may not be able to get a substance, or is high on a substance or alcohol and not functioning properly and not thinking logistically.
Right.
So anyways, those are a few. Can you think of some other ones that
yes.
that might lead to that?
Yes, those are some very, very good ones. Some of the ones that I like to talk about are the ones that really aren't so black and white sometimes in terms of you're either here or you're there. And how easy it is for us, any parent, it doesn't matter who we are, to be able to, you know, we really want to be here, but sometimes things happen in life, and one of the biggest things I can think about, for an example, is stress.
Oh, yeah.
Chronic stress. And no matter how great we feel like we're doing as parents, when chronic stress grips a hold of us, or grief from loss of a family member, maybe a death in the family, or chronic health issues with someone, you know, there might be a lot of different reasons, but stress can just wear and tear on us. And when we're trying to parent, and you know, both you and I have young children, and I think that's a time when it's especially hard at times. They're very needy.
Yeah.
They're very needy, and when you just have so much stress in your life, or something that's really hurting you, it's difficult.
Absolutely.
I think to be able to be the parent we want to be at all times. And then, you know, even just the way we view our children. I have a 6-year-old daughter, and you know, I view her as my sunshine, but there are also days when I just can't take anymore. I just can't take anymore.
Sure.
And we all feel that way, and it's okay to feel that way.
Sure.
But you know, there are, of course, again, some extremes. There are, you know, situations where there are parents who view their child as a problem.
Yeah.
It may be an unwanted pregnancy, or it may even be some things like chronic stress due to a child who has a disability, or caring for someone else's child long term, step parenting. Step parents talk about this a lot in terms of that chronic stress. And so, you know, things like that can really play into and put us one spot at one point in time and another spot at another time. And, you know, that's not necessarily abuse, and I think that's important to point out. But it's also something we need to watch out for, and kind of take a step outside of ourselves at times.
Absolutely, and that's not to say that this is what if this is happening in your life, if you're stressed out in life, then you're going to abuse your child.
Yes,
That's not
absolutely.
what we're saying. But there's certainly variables that play a large factor into why it happens,
Yes.
and how it can occur. And even the most sane and loving parent can find themselves in a space where they're not thinking logically, right? They're not being rational, and allowing their emotions and their anger to get the best of them can hurt a child, for sure.
And even your own childhood, I think, can play into that. Childhood experiences
well
you've
said.
had
Yeah.
that, you know, if you've had experience in your own childhood with physical or emotional abuse, or with drug addiction, or mental health issues in the family, or with your parents or caretakers, it can be very easy, if you will, to slide into some of those known behaviors when you're in a very stressed time of your life, mostly because that's what you've learned.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get past that at times. It's hard to think past, this is what I've learned versus this is who I want to be as a parent.
Yeah.
And we all get stuck in that sometimes.
Well stated.
Yes, it's easy to take what we've learned and consider that the norm.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. Well, the good part of that, so understanding that these are some reasons why. The good news is that there are things that we know that we can do as parents, as caretakers. You don't even have to be a parent. You could be kinship care or caregiving or provider. There are things that we can do to mitigate the risk of hurting and harming a child. And some of those things, and I think maybe I'll shift gears. We talked a lot about abuse, and so we're talking about having the knowledge is definitely important. But now we'll talk a little bit more about sexual abuse and this idea of what we can do to protect our children from experiencing that. And one of the things I think, Carrie, is a big issue in the parenting field. It's interesting how many people gravitate towards the idea that it's okay to use play names for our sexual organs, you know, and I'd absolutely combat that. That's not at all accurate. What the best thing to do is to teach our children the proper names for our genitalia. Right. It's important to tell a child that this is your penis or this is your vagina, and then they understand that this is a private place, right? And I'll share a little bit of my own life. My daughter is 7 years old, and so she bathes by herself, and and we teach her all the time that, hey, these are your areas, right? These are your private parts. If things begin to hurt, then you can talk to mom about that. But no one touches you here, right? These are your special spots, and dad's not going to clean you there. Mom can help you there if you need, and that these are yours and yours alone. And it is okay to tell people no. It's okay to say no. You're teaching our children it's okay to say no to that, and that no one is allowed to touch you here. And if someone tries, then you need to talk to us about it. And one of the things that you hear a lot with children that are sexually abused is that oftentimes they don't know the proper terminology for their private areas, and so they learn pet names and things, and so when they try and communicate that to an adult may not understand what it is that they're trying to say. And oftentimes that's how some abuse, specifically sexual abuse, goes unreported to authorities, is that the child has learned pet names and they talk to pet names and talk about their areas as pet names. So I think just using proper terminology for their privates, again, teaching a child that these are yours. It's okay to say no. No one's allowed to touch you here, even if you know that person. And then to never leave your child alone with someone you don't trust. Sure. Right? Always go with your gut. And I tell my kids that if someone feels scary to you, then don't go towards them. You know, if your gut's telling you something, rely on that. And that's important for parents, for kinship care providers, for daycare providers. If you're working with someone and you feel like, gosh, something about this child just doesn't seem right, trust that gut. Right. It's important to continue to go on your haunches. Yes.
And one of the best things I think to go with that is, as a parent, to think about minimizing opportunity. One-on-one opportunities between an adult and a child are when sexual abuse most often occurs. Yeah. And when you can minimize those opportunities where a child is one-on-one with an adult, then you can oftentimes minimize the opportunity for sexual abuse to occur.
Really good point.
And it is certainly not easy to talk about these things. You know, we've been taught to not talk about these things a lot of the time. We've been taught to not use the proper terminology, and it is not easy to talk to our kids about it at all. No. For one thing, we've been taught to feel ashamed, but it's also just terrifying. You know, I know for me personally, raising a daughter, it's scary for me. Yeah. It's scary to talk about it. I don't even really want to think about it. I wish we didn't have to talk about it. But there are some great resources out there, too, to help you as parents or as educators to be able to broach some of these topics with kids. Yeah. There's some wonderful books, for example, and then you have a win-win. Yeah. You're able to talk about it, and you're also able to sneak the literacy topic in there, too. And one great book that I have used already some with my own daughter is My Body Belongs to Me. Have you ever heard of that book before?
No,
it's a great book.
Yeah, I'll check that out. One of the things I want to go back to, because I thought it was really important that you said that, was this idea of not leaving our children alone with an adult. And I think oftentimes there are trusted adults in our lives. Medical staff is oftentimes one of those. And we know you don't have to go, you know, if you haven't turned a TV on in a year, you might not know this, but there's been that big splash about the physician who, with the gymnast, and how many people he was sexually molesting, and it's difficult when you have staff that are professional that you're supposed to trust. And so I think, again, just a good reminder that even when our children go to doctor's visits, we don't leave the room, right? We stay in there, right? We don't, yeah, I think that's just a really
and stand your ground, you know. Yeah. Again, going back to what David said about using your gut, that, you know, when you feel like you need to be in the room, even if someone's suggesting you don't, or even if they're giving it to you as take a break, it's okay, you know, that if you feel like you need to be in there, stand your ground.
Right, right. And the worst thing to do is to try and turn everybody around you, your loved ones, into criminals, and this idea that everybody's out to hurt my child. And that's not at all our intention for today. But it's easy. I recognize that, having gone through some classes myself, to begin to think, oh my gosh, everybody's trying to hurt my children. I don't think that's the case. And so I think that's important that we go back to trusting your gut. Absolutely. So I appreciate you adding that piece.
Absolutely.
And then again, talking about this idea that children oftentimes, we've been taught not to talk about it. So another way that parents can really work to mitigate this in their own homes and protect their children is to encourage this talking about feelings, talking about the things that are difficult to talk about, having those kind of conversations at the dinner table or in the time when you get to meet as a family. So encouraging those types of conversations, even if they haven't been something that you've done in your own home, growing up or in the past.
Yes, and you're right. Talking about feelings then opens the door to being able to talk about other things as well.
Yeah.
And the communication piece is just so critical when you think about things like reporting of an incident. When a kid does come to an adult and reports something, that's a terrifying moment for a child. They may have been told not to.
Absolutely.
They may have been threatened on something that might happen if they do tell an adult. And so it's important to remember, I think, more than anything else at times, that very few reported incidents are ever false.
Yeah.
And when a child comes to you as a parent or as a trusted adult, an educator, a teacher in their lives, a friend, a neighbor, that it's very important to believe them.
Yeah.
And, if it's reported to you, to think about that now. If you're around kids in your life, think about now how you'll react if or when that ever does happen and a child does come to you as their trusted adult. How will you react? First and foremost, don't overreact. Overreacting, I think, can scare a child away from continuing to talk.
Absolutely.
And continuing to keep that communication line open. Offering support. Telling them that you're there for them and that you're not going to leave them alone once they've reported something to you. Acting on suspicions, of course, and reporting it to the proper authorities. I think that's one thing we're all scared to do a lot of the time in this world. And we don't even necessarily know how to do that. And we'll talk about that again in a few minutes as we get toward the end of this. And then just simply telling a child, yes, talk to me about it. It's okay to talk to me about it. But not asking too many questions either. Letting the child lead you so that you're not asking leading questions.
Yeah. This is I feel like we could talk about this for a really long time, and I want to be mindful of the time that we have. So maybe in trying to wrap some of this up, Carrie, maybe you can tell the viewers a little bit about what they might be able to do to get involved in their own communities if they want to continue this prevention effort, not just in their own home, but really to be a steward of prevention in trying to stop this.
Yes, I know we have some educators that are on with us today, so I'd like to maybe start with a few points to educators. Number one, you touched on earlier, is parenting skills, concrete skills for not only parenting knowledge and child development and age appropriateness, but also the stress piece. Again, I come back to that. Just how stressful it is in today's world to be a parent. I think it's very important to talk about that. Planning and goal setting, helping parents to be able to lay some of those things out, and anticipating the obstacles that are going to inevitably come along the way, and those moments when things are really going to be tough and you're going to be tried. Problem solving, talking about the communication piece, and then simply just self-care. We've all got to care for ourselves. If we're not caring for ourselves, we can't properly care for our children.
Yeah, good.
Partnering. Partnering is just so important. We all hear the line all the time, it takes a village.
Yeah.
And it's so true. We just can't tackle a topic like child abuse by ourselves or as one agency or one individual. That we've got to work together in our communities. We've got to work with government. We've got to work with organizations that are out there working with children. All of us together can really move the lever on this to help prevent child abuse in the future.
That's great. And one of those organizations, one that I work closely with, that's here in Fayette County, for those that don't know, is Prevent Child Abuse Kentucky. And you can visit their website, preventchildabusekentucky.org. They're a wealth of information. One of the things that they offer that I've attended, and I recommend this to any of the child care providers there, any 4-H clubs that work with volunteers, churches that have volunteers that work with young people, contact them. They have classes that are free. They come out, they're all over, they provide these classes all over the state of Kentucky in different counties at different times. You can find that information on their website. It's free. It's a great training. They do a really good job. I can't say enough about them. And if you want to help with that prevention effort, they definitely have a lot of ways that you can practically be involved in the prevention effort throughout the state.
Yes, and that training piece is so important, and that's where we come back to that. You know, a lot of people say, oh, well, I wouldn't know what to do if I ever did need to report, if I ever did have a child come to me, or I witnessed something. And that's where Prevent Child Abuse Kentucky can come in. They have wonderful resources. And, you know, getting those resources into the hands of staff, any educator that's working with children, you can't do too much. You just can't. You can't have too many resources on this topic to be able to help staff learn how to assess early signs and then know how to report when reporting is needed.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, Carrie, thank you so much for being a part of that. I want to check real quick that it really wraps up what we were wanting to talk about. I'm going to look to see if we've got any questions from our audience real quick, and I don't see any. I don't see any at the time. So.
And while you're checking, I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
We'll wait for just another moment here while we're waiting to see if anybody does have any questions. Sure. You know, thinking about the parent side when it comes to preventing child abuse. You know, we think about us as our own parent, you know, as we are parents of our own children. But one of the great things I like to talk about with people on the prevention side is helping others. Helping a friend, helping a neighbor. We all have needs in our lives. We all have stresses. We all have emergencies. And reaching out and offering that tangible help. Sometimes I think we all, you know, it's easy to say to somebody, let me know if you need help. But sometimes people won't ask for it,
That's
or
right.
they don't know how to ask for it. And so, you know, going and offering a tangible, you know, here, bring your child over and let me keep them for a couple of hours tonight while you have a little time to yourself, or while you go to the hospital and visit an ill family member, or, you know, whatever it may be, and asking for help ourselves too. It's easier said than done. I know it is, but asking for help when we need it as well, especially at those times when we feel, you know, like the life has just gotten to be too much.
Sure.
And you know, things like even a baby crying, or you know, those earliest days when we're the most lost as early parents and we don't know what to do. Remembering how frustrating it can be, but that we all feel it, that it's totally normal and there's nothing different about us. And, you know, what to do. Not shaking a baby, for example, not shaking a child. Calling a hotline even, if it gets to the point of where you know you're about to do something. Taking a break and not, you know, remembering that neglect is different than just stepping out for a moment and catching your breath. Sometimes we need timeouts too as adults.
Absolutely, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
And just, you know, things like monitoring children's television, video, and internet use. Monitoring our own sometimes too, making sure we're there and present and engaged. Promoting programs in our schools, using resources of our libraries, or even helping to develop resources in our local libraries if they don't have any, are all great ways that we can reach out to help to prevent child abuse. Volunteering, or donating to programs that are out there, local child abuse prevention programs. And then one of the last things I just wanted to mention briefly was who to call. And a number to always keep handy if you want to jot this down, our viewers that we have today, is simply 1-800-4A-CHILD. And that it's a way to be able to help you with reporting and a way to be able to help you as a parent too, if life is getting to be too much and you just need to reach out to somebody.
Well, great. Well, I have got a text, and it looks like we are all good at this moment. But if there any time, if you view this at a later time and you have questions, please post them. We'll make sure that we get to them and get you an answer as fast as we can. So I want to thank you again, Carrie, for this time together, and I hope you all will join us in our Prevention Month.
Yes. Thank you for your time.